Coop, how excited are you about Russell Wilson's massive performance against Cincinnati? 400 plus passing yards, was able to do it without hyper-targeting George Pickens. George Pickens had his lowest target share of the season, and Wilson is still cooking. Seems like a player that's super comfortable in this offense.
I'll tell you what I'm most excited about from it is not even necessarily the performance for Russell Wilson, but the fact that Justin Fields and these packages stayed off the field for the most part until the very, very end of the game, 2 snaps or whatever to kind of close it out. But I was worried. I was worried that we might have a Taysom Hill type situation here, which has always held down the value of Derek Carr, always hurt the ceiling. Because if your quarterback's going to come out of the game in the red area where it matters most for fantasy, that is a killer. So the fact that they leaned on him in an incredibly important matchup against the Bengals this week and let him drive the bus of the team of destiny all the way to a win, 44 points on the board, targeting everybody on the squad, not just George Pickens. I mean, it was a beautiful thing. And if you're looking for a spot start for Buy Him Again Part 2, Russell Wilson probably should be the top waiver ad. The other guy I'm looking at, especially if your top quarterback is somebody that you don't trust, that you don't believe in, or in deeper leagues, the next guy I'm looking at, and I'm willing to start, and Theo, I know you're willing to start in a league where you have to start him, but Will Levis all of a sudden has actually looked pretty decent for fantasy. Like, yes, they got blown out this week. Yes, he threw 2 touchdown passes, and they both went to Nick Westbrook and Keeney, but he's coming out every week, and he's letting the ball fly, throwing for over 200 yards. And in each one of these games, 4 straight games, he's had over 15 fantasy points, between 15 and 20. Sometimes at the QB position, that's all you need. You need to have that decent floor with a little bit of upside. And these past matchups have all been his worst ones for the rest of the season. Every matchup he has rest of the way is better than the ones he's had since he got hurt. I mean, he faces the Jaguars, the Colts, the Bengals, and then the Jaguars again. If he blows up this week on the Jaguars, then you know that you could potentially circle back and start him championship week. I know you and your team, what do you have, Lamar Jackson and Bo Nix?
He'll be back on the bench that game, but I'm hoping
he'll be back on the bench.
Yeah, we won't cut him. If he gets me through this week and does what he's supposed to do, I'll keep him on so he can enjoy the championship ride, Coop.
Play a little defense.
Get him that ring.
Get him that ring. Maybe cut him right before, or maybe cut him right when your opponent can't pick him up. Maybe a little whether it was a Taekwon Underwood Belichick cut right before the Super Bowl, but he got a ring in.
It's like mental war games, and that I'll keep it real short and sweet for the running back position. If you have fab left and Jordan Mason is available in your league, spend it all and spend every last cent you have to get Jordan Mason. We saw Jordan Mason to start out the season, Coop, where he was absolutely smashing. The guy has almost 800 rushing yards on the season, but Christian McCaffrey looks like he's done for the year. This is a player in Jordan Mason where saw him have 3 top 5 weekly performances. The guy's averaging 5.2 yards per carry. The backfield is now his again. And I think Jordan Mason actually has a little bit of value heading into 2025, Coop, because this is a 25-year-old player who's done well in the Shanahan system. McCaffrey's getting older, and this is not a franchise that's just going to go out and say, I'm going to go get myself some Ashton Genty. They've actually got a number of problems that have been exposed this season on both sides of the ball. They need to address those. So you might go into next season seeing Jordan Mason as a player that people want to draft in redraft leagues, but right now he's the priority. And if he's not available in your league, check on Tank Bigsby. Bigsby returned this past week, gets 7 carries. Travis Etienne's been banged up for multiple weeks. And really, when we talk about Bigsby's been a player that has been more productive all season long as a runner. You got to think that they're just going to give Bigsby the ball at least enough to be fantasy viable down the stretch.
Yeah, it's about time, man. And the danger of going with the Burrow Chase move is because when it works, it's great. When it doesn't, you've got these guys that are really good friends, right? Like Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne went to Clemson together. They're friends. It's hard to do that to them and kind of break them up. Same with Dak Prescott and Zeke Elliott. Very good friends. So it's hard to kind of fade away Zeke when Zeke stops being efficient. But Bigsby has been better every step of the way. And they got to do the right thing, just like the Buccaneers have done with Bucky Irving, giving him a lot more work. You got to give the guy who's looking better more work so he can get into a rhythm. So I'm with you on that. I guess for streamers, Tyler Algier chasing touchdowns. There's not, but Bigsby, obviously, if he's out there, I guess in really deep leagues, now that Taysom Hill is out, you can try a Jamal Williams type play. They can't give the ball to Alvin Kamara every play, even though I'd love for them to do that. So that's where I'm at. And then for stashes, who are you looking at? I mean, we're still looking at like Blake Corum as the top stash. Theo, anybody else?
I mean, the usual suspects. It's just there hasn't been any running back injuries. They're
Right.
all good players to stash, Coop.
Knock on wood.
I will say the Braylon Allen one with Isaiah Davis getting a little playing time, a little bit of that I didn't love to see.
No.
When Breece Hall gets 12 carries. If I told you 2 days ago Breece Hall's getting 12 carries, you're like, okay, my guy Braylon Allen is getting double-digit touches this week. Davis got the early touchdown. It was sort of like, I don't want to see that. But yeah, you're right. Blake Corum, early on, it looked like it was going to be a committee for about a quarter and a half, and then it was Kyron Williams in the second half. All of those guys, the Trey Bensons, the Blake Corums, if any of them have an injury in front of them, it sort of wheels up. And then if you're in a very, very deep league, I do think Sincere McCormick, the way he played against Kansas City, he looked pretty good. And stranger things have happened this time of year than a young running back from Texas San Antonio getting some bump to end the season for a team that's been eliminated from the playoffs. It could happen.
Right.
Talk to me about some tight end. Talk to me about some tight ends, though, Coop.
Before we jump over it, since if you're going deep to Sincere McCormick, then we got to mention Jeremy McNichols, just because Eckler they put on IR because of the bye week. He's not even eligible to return to week 18. That means he's meaningless to us in fantasy. So McNichols did get the work. Don't worry about the Chris Rodriguez touches. Those were all towards the end of the game when they were up like 42 to 17 or whatever it was. So he's at least going to be in that role. And Brian Robinson Jr., not exactly the healthiest guy. So at tight end, you got to figure out how deep your league is. In shallower leagues, I know Pat Frybooth hit the waivers in a lot of leagues, and especially when you have bye weeks and then a week with everybody healthy, and then bye weeks again. There's a lot of roster shuffling, right? So he's hit the wire. I mean, he's been good all year. His catch rate coming into last week, Theo, per Pro Football Focus on catchable targets was 92%. So this week when he went out and caught 6 of 7, that actually lowered his catch rate. That's how efficient he's been. If you got a guy who's catching everything, just find a way to get him the ball more. So if he's out there, grab him. Zach Ertz has been as reliable as they come, and Noah Brown's got a rib injury now, which kind of locks his targets in more than ever. And then with the injury to Taysom Hill, it just means the ball can go to everybody else. It kind of takes the leash off that offense, and now Derek Carr's going to throw more. I mentioned Jamal Williams, but Juwan Johnson came out. He had a pretty good game here with 7 targets this week, caught 5 of them. So he's on the table as well. And then it's like the usual suspects for streaming. Will Disley, he's dealing with a groin issue, so definitely stay up on that. That's why he probably only got 1 target this week, but Ertz and Disley, kind of similar guys. Chigakonkwo has the athleticism to break off big plays. Tommy Tremble played 100% of the snaps. So Ian Thomas is on IR. Jatavian Sanders, as long as he remains out, Tremble is a dart throw, maybe more tight end premium or DFS, but that's kind of it. And then, of course, I guess if Goddard's going to miss time, are you a Grant Calcaterra guy? Do you ever dabble in the dark arts?
I've had a little Grant. I actually had to use him 1 week, and it was a week he completely dudded out. So
of course,
I think he's interesting because I do think the role will be similar to Goddard with a decline. Also, you have the Devonta Smith being completely banged up. So I don't think he'll be like a 0, but I'd be more excited actually about if I'm like in a super deep format, I'm a little more excited about like a Tommy Tremble who had 7 targets, a Juwan Johnson who had 7 targets, and all these guys with injuries ahead of them. For me, at the wide receiver position though, Coop, Marquez Valdez-Scantling now has 4 touchdowns in 2 games played. This is a player that now I think that they're going to have to start using him more with the Taysom Hill injury. So MVS is actually interesting to me. This is a player where he gets a ton of air yards. It's sort of the one thing that Derek Carr does well is downfield looks. For me, he's a super interesting one. I love adding Adam Thielen if Adam Thielen is available in your league. Xavier Legette as well because Bryce Young has started to play better. Both of those guys are appealing. I think that Brandon Cooks is sneaky. Cooks was a guy that we were excited to talk about in like week 1. Then obviously gets banged up. You had the Jalen Tolbert doing well for a few weeks. But now we're sort of back to full circle because CeeDee Lamb dealing with a shoulder injury. Cowboys are 5-7. How long does a banged up CeeDee Lamb keep going if this is something that's going to get re-aggravated? So Brandon Cooks could sort of give you low-end flex value for the rest of the season if he's the main target in Dallas. And then talk about Alec Pierce. The guy catches a ton of touchdowns. He's got, I believe, 5 on the season, which is the most he's had in his career. Low volume, But again, you're talking about 6 teams on bye, and then got to keep an eye on that Ladd McConkey injury. If Ladd McConkey is going to miss this week, even though the guy drops a lot of balls, Quentin Johnson is going to get extra targets this week against the Kansas City Chiefs in a game where we're hoping they're scoring. You take away Ladd McConkey in that game, Cook, it might be like a 14-10 game.
Yeah, exactly. And like that whole group of guys, I mean, at a certain point, you have to ask yourself, like, am I going to start a part-time slot guy that's just going to get me a couple catches and no yards, like a Tyler Boyd type guy? Or should I just pull the trigger on somebody that could have a 60-yard touchdown? And that's when I look at guys like MVS, Xavier Legette, Alec Pierce, Quentin Johnston, because there's no difference between, the number of targets. Even a guy like Demario Douglas, who, is just kind of empty, low A dot targets. Like, how much does it help you if a guy catches 5 for 40 yards versus somebody that could go out and catch 4 or 5, but it's for 110 yards? That's why a lot of times I do lean into these type guys. For stashes, I'll throw out names like, with Rashad Bateman out, I guess maybe Tylan Wallace in a deeper league, though they're on bye. Obviously, Parker Washington got some extra usage here, with Christian Kirk out. But
12 targets for Washington. 12 targets for Washington, yep.
Yeah. Keep an eye on the Noah Brown injury. De'Ami Brown took over that spot. Again, these are kind of stashes because they're all on bye week. And then I did see in a couple of leagues that people were dropping Romeo Doubs. And that's a guy that if he hit the wire, you got to scoop him up. I guess, Keyshawn Butte's playing snaps, but doesn't really look pretty over there. At this stage, I'm leaning away from these stashes. Like, it's like, how long can we stash a guy like Jalen Polk or Javon Baker who aren't even playing? It's like time to maybe swap out the stashes for guys that might make a spot start for you with good matchups. And that's where I do look at like a Nick Westbrook-Ikhine and his schedule and say, wait a second, okay, this guy's going to catch touchdowns. If he's going to get 7 targets, and now all of a sudden he's going to have the best passing schedule in the league, all right, fine.
If you don't have a Will Levis, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine stack going on this week in the By-Mageddon Part 2, then you don't have enough fantasy teams.
That's right. You got to get one out there. And if you don't have enough fantasy teams, make a DFS lineup. All right, get in.
No doubt about it. And we'll see you back next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about that. One of the final waiver wire pushes for fantasy managers in the playoffs. We'll be able to discuss fewer guys because there's fewer competitions on the waiver wire. We'll see you next week.